Do you ever stop and think about those people that never had to help you along the way, but they did? The ones that reached out with encouragement, that advocated for you when they didn't have to. The ones that spoke up for you in rooms that you weren't in. The ones that saw opportunities and sent them your way. The ones that believed in you at times when you didn't even yet believe in yourself. Well, my guest today is one of those people. She is a woman who has done exactly that for so many youth in the dairy industry. And at one point in time, I was one of those. And that's why it's my greatest pleasure and greatest honor to welcome to the Uplevel Dairy Podcast today, Katie Coyne. And not too long ago, I had heard that she was in her final stages of her time on this side of heaven and realized that it was time for me to sit down with someone who had been a part of so many other people's dairy stories and to tell her own and to capture the wisdom of a woman who has been a tireless advocate for youth in the dairy industry and the life lessons she's learned along the way. If there's someone who has ever done these things for you, I hope you take a minute to not just listen to this episode, but share it with them. And use this as a way to say thank you and acknowledge the efforts and the things they didn't have to do that helped you become the person you are. Sit down with me here today and Katie Coyne right here on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. Katie, I will have you introduce yourself, but I want to also introduce you as how I've seen you and how I've known you from my years in junior Holsteins. And when I think about my first introductions to you, Katie, I remember being a little kid at Wisconsin Holstein Convention doing Quiz Bowl. And I remember you showing up with your girls who were a little bit younger than me, but boy, when they showed up, they were ready. They were prepared. They were rock stars. But what really always stood out in my mind when I think of Katie Coyne, I just think of this articulate woman who was confident in herself, but also has this beautiful ability to just see things in other people and to draw that out. And I was a beneficiary of that. I know there were things where you advocated for me when I was a youth. I saw you do it for McKenna, for my daughter, and we're just two people. These are not isolated incidences. This is how you've lived your life. And that's why it's so important and so meaningful that you and I get to have this conversation, because I really want to get to the heart of what's been driving you all of your life, and even at this stage of your life, to just never stop relentlessly advocating for kids, for dairy youth, and for just being able to see the potential. Like, whether it was seeing the potential in a calf in a pen, or seeing the potential in a little kid in white show pants, or a little kid at a dairy bull buzzer. Like, when I think of you, Katie, I think of those as some of your greatest gifts. But I want to use this opportunity to not just share those stories of what I've seen, but really to share your story, because you have been a part of so many other people's dairy stories. So let's just start out. What's your dairy story? How did you develop the passion that you have and the dedication to not just the industry, but truly the people in it?
Well, thank you, Peggy, for that introduction. My dad was a dairy farmer. He was an auctioneer. He loved showing cattle. And because he was an auctioneer, he got to travel around the U.S. and always brought back the latest technique to our little farm. We just milked like 30 cows. And quite frankly, I don't even hardly remember milking. We boarded a lot of cattle and stuff. But my brothers and sister and I would set up a show barn, and we'd spend weeks in the summer sitting in the show barn watching the show string. I still remember my mom saying, "What are you guys doing? There's stuff to do here." Well, we're watching the show string. We were pretty little then, but so my dad was a big show person, and also he was really a role model for me as far as volunteering and helping people. And He had lots of new ideas. In New York State, we have a show in the spring called the New York Dairy Carousel, and my dad was a big person in getting that started. So having an idea and seeing it through. My mom loved cows. When I'm in a show clinic, I'll say to a person, you're a cow person. You get animals. So all you have to do is tweak these rules and what I've taught you today, and you're good to go. And that was my mom. She loved being in the barn and milking and all those kinds of things. So I was really fortunate to do that. I went to college at UW River Falls and had a great internship and learned a lot more things, and spent the summer in Wisconsin, which was probably a big part of who I am today, because in New York State at the time, dairies were getting larger and showing was going the other way. So in Wisconsin, my cousin just asked me recently, why did you stay in Wisconsin? And I said, because if you go to one county fair in Wisconsin, you're someone like me, you never want to leave. So, but through the years, as far as the dairy industry, we had a herd of Holsteins and Brown Swiss, very successful. We boarded about half the herd, and the rest was ours, and we had a lot of nominations. We had really high BAA. We did really well in the early 2000s, and it was the right time the girls went to college. Wyatt was still pretty young, so we sold the herd. And then I went to work at different places in the industry, as we'll talk about as we go through this. But I've worked for an IVF company. I'm currently still writing a little bit for Progressive Dairy. I've been an editor for them the past few years. I've been a herdsman in Ontario, Canada, which was quite an adventure. I've shown cattle. I've raised heifers for people. Lots of different pieces of the dairy industry that have really kind of got me where I am today. And today I own a Mill Wheel Show Clinics, which is a business, and I travel literally coast to coast and teach youth how to fit and feed and show cattle.
And Katie, as you share this journey and this dairy story, starting out in New York with your brothers and sister, having the little show string in the barn that was your life and your pride and your joy, and this influence of your father, who was able to bring in some ideas and mentor in that respect, but also the strong influence of your mother as well, who found just as much joy in that, and also was right by your side with your brothers and sister, just kind of ushering through this love for the cattle. But as you expanded upon that, Katie, too, that really led to your ability to not just have a career in the industry, but to also have these connections with people, too. And so, again, when I think about you, I think about not just the accolades and the bylines, but I think about the people that you've influenced. And so that is, I think, one of the things, like I said, that I admire most is you have been so dedicated to dairy youth. And we all have a why, right? We all have that burning desire in our heart, that powerful and purposeful statement that drives us to do what we do and to do it relentlessly and fervently for a long, long time. And so for you, what is your why? How would you define your why, Katie?
Well, I think there's kind of 3 steps to that answer. The first one is someone did it for me. When I was growing up, we had this really great 4-H agent, and there were a lot of Coyne cousins and my brothers and sister, and that poor guy, but he took us to he was our judging coach. Took us to every judging conference. When I was on the New York State 4-H judging team, he took us to Harrisburg. He just was I know he was paid for what he did, but I'm sure he volunteered a lot as well. And also, so when we were growing up, we took our own cattle to shows. And in 1975, I was really young, but I had bought a calf, and my dad was really busy with his business, so someone took that calf to a show for us, which in those days was completely foreign to me and not nearly like it is today. And I don't have a lot of memories of it, but a little bit I remember was and I probably remember it because I've said it for many, many years. These people took this calf to the show for me and got her ready, and she won her class at the Eastern National in Harrisburg. And I just was like, I can't believe these people did this for me. So the beginning of my why is someone did it for me. And the second piece of my why is I'm a little bit competitive. So it's fun for me to find a person who I see something in that they maybe don't even see in themselves, and to say to them, this is something you could do, or you can win this showmanship. It's going to take a lot of work. I call this, there's kids with the silver spoon whose parents grew up doing this, and that was my family, and since then many, many families. But there are kids who come into this with their parents don't show cattle, or never even seen a cow, and they've gotten into it for some reason. And I like to see that person and say, hey, this is what I can teach you, and then you can do with it what you need to do. As well as the nerd kid, I love to find the person sitting around who's not part of the football team or the cheerleader or whatever it is, and say, this is something you can do. You can show cattle, and I'll take you along with me. I'll give you this calf. I'll take you to the show. We'll do what we need to do. And then they become the cool kid. I always say, you might not be the cool kid in school, but you're the cool kid in the show ring. So the competitive part of me wants to find those kids and teach those kids. And the other reason is, and I could say this in my family, both my siblings and my children, is I think we get this from my mom, but I'm not sure. But we see a need and say, can we do something to fulfill that need? So, for example, many years ago, I was the Junior Activities Committee Advisor for Wisconsin Junior Holstein, and it was just the start of kids getting into showing cattle who didn't come from farms. And I thought, and these kids were going out and buying a $700 calf that didn't do well, and they were discouraged. And I went to the Junior Activities Committee and said, what if we allow kids to be partners on calves? And so they can put their $700 together and get a $1,400 calf, a little better pedigree, and it helps the breeder too, because then we've sold a calf for a little more money. And it took a little while for them to say okay, and then they took it to national. And now today we see kids, big partnerships, and it gives kids the opportunity to, build a friendship, build a partnership, do well, and this person can show it at the county fair, but this person can show it at the Dairy Expo, and they're all part of it together. And a lot of things have happened. And showmanship at the Wisconsin Junior State Fair used to be, we picked the kids out of the class, or the county could pick one person to show. And I was standing there one year with a person from the Dairy Promotion Board. I served on the Dairy Promotion Board at Wisconsin State Fair, and I said, why can't we split these rings up and get 4 judges and let every kid have the opportunity to show here? And it, on our part, luckily she was part of it because she wasn't part of showmanship, but it took a little convincing on our part that it would work. But we mapped it all out, and now it's one of the biggest and most competitive showmanship contests anywhere in the world. And so that looking for a need and being brave enough to say, is this going to work? There's some cases today where I think, should I say something? And I have nothing left to lose, so I might as well just say it and see if something happens from it. But it's definitely a personality trait in our family, for sure, because we're all a little vocal about where we see a need.
Yeah, and what you just shared, Katie, what really stands out to me in that story of what has made up your why, these multiple pieces and parts, is that you have that ability to see beyond what's right in front of you, and to also see it from the perspective of the highest and greatest good. And that highest and greatest good is, it always comes back to that youth, to that individual, or multiple individuals, and providing them with an opportunity. that you can see for them that, as you said, maybe they don't even see in themselves yet, but you can provide those little nudges and that little path to their version of success that they might not even be able to visualize yet, but you can see it for them and you can see it in them. And it was also so neat how you tied that into that powerful experience you had as a youth when someone took you under their wing. And again, they didn't have to do that. Just like you didn't have to do the things that you have done to pour your heart and to call out potential in individuals, but you still do it. And then that's also part of your own why. And that's to be that person that does for others what someone once did for you. And I think a lot of our current dairy youth today, when they hear Katie Coyne, they think of showmanship and showmanship clinics. And just speak for a moment about why that particular piece of youth programming and showing, why it just means so much to you, and why that part is something that you just continue to pour into others.
I've been teaching youth how to show, and it's a 50-50. I teach it, but they have to learn it for years and years. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I was doing the NASCO fitting clinic, and Chuck Miller at NASCO said, would you do showmanship as a little piece of that too? And so I did, and I worked that day with a person from Weaver Livestock, Kirk Steerwalt, who's like the guru of clinics and showing beef. And I said, I think I can do this. My roommate in college had also worked with him, and she said, I think you should do this in dairy. And so the Weaver person was there that day. All of these little pieces come together. And then I went ahead and did it and got the business going. And I had to call a lot of people and say, can I come do this? But I tell people at clinics, showmanship, I'm teaching you showmanship. I'm teaching you these are the rules. This is how to do it. But I also say, this is your posture. Look the judge in the eye. What are you wearing? How are you presenting yourself? All those kinds of things that I think are things that are important. And the other piece of all of it is, as we've talked a little bit about, there's so many youth in the dairy industry, whether it's through an FFA or breed association, 4-H, they're showing because someone said, hey, this is a dairy program, do you want to do it? And I think it's really important to nurture that. And quite frankly, as I say at showmanship clinics a lot, the challenges of the dairy business, when it's 90 degrees out and 90% humidity, and you're standing at the end of your tie stall barn and you have to milk the cows in the flies and the hot cows and all that stuff, that is the not fun. Showing is always fun. Even when you don't win or you don't get what you think you should get, it's more fun than milking those cows, or it's more fun on a big dairy than the day the manure system isn't working or the feed wagon broke down or whatever it is. The bird flu comes along. Whatever it is, showing cattle is fun for lots of reasons, and so it's a good thing to continue it. And that's, to me, the showmanship piece of it. Is my neighbors said we never showed in 4-H, and there's a lot of children and grandchildren, and I'm like, they should, because they're going to see a whole different side of dairying than their very, very successful dairy that they have. So I just think it's something fun, and it should always be fun, is what I tell kids, that young people can do. And then it goes, the next step is keeps them in the dairy industry as nutritionists, veterinarians, all the things, herd managers, all the things that we need.
And I think you hit on something really important here and powerful, Katie, when we look at this bigger picture of the impact of these relationships and conversations that you've had with so many youth over the years. And that's the future that it's setting them up for. So as you said, those paths, those career paths, but also for many, even those youth that come from dairy operations that have grown to a scale where they can't be as hands-on, or it's really difficult to integrate them into the daily operations on the dairy. It also gives them the opportunity that they can really learn hands-on these one-on-one relationships with cattle. And that's not as easy to generate as it used to be, as our dairies operate in a different way. Do you see that too as one of the like powerful impact pieces of how this work, in showmanship, it's so much more. It speaks to so much more of a path forward, that maybe it was a show calf, but it's going to translate into how that individual can take their hands-on experience and the confidence too that they can build through that, and the understanding, and take that into a different way to impact the industry. And Katie, as you just share this breadth and depth of experiences that you've been able to have, what dairy's done for you, but more importantly, what you've done back for the dairy community, it's incredibly powerful. But the missing piece that we haven't really shared yet for those that don't know you, Katie, is that there's a whole nother aspect to your influence and impact in the dairy community. And going back to my experience of how I've always remembered you, Katie, from when I was 12 years old doing Dairy Bowl, and what I also remember about you is that you had cancer at a young age and have really continued to battle that fight up until where we're at right now. And can you maybe just take a moment and just share a little bit about that piece of your story that has been going on while you've been leading these efforts and advocating relentlessly for youth? You've also been fighting your own battle. When did that start, and what's that been like?
Well, it's a long story, so I'll keep it short. In my early 20s, I found out I had a type of bone cancer, and I was never sick as a child at all. Like, I would never even miss school except for a cow show. And so at the time, the doctor said, this is what we think you have, and we're not really sure how to treat it. And I said, well, just go ahead and do whatever you can do. And then that was one type. And then in 2015, I had a neck cancer, which had spread. It was stage 4, so it had already spread to the lymph nodes. And again, I was at UW-Madison, which is a great place to be treated for cancer. And they did a really tough regimen and got rid of that. And then last August, I didn't feel well, so I went to the doctor and they said, well, you have high-grade serous carcinoma. So even though we don't hear about it, a lot of people have different types of cancer throughout their life. So I said, well, what is that? And it happened to start in my ovaries, uterus, and when they found it, it had already spread to my spine, ribs, hip bones, my lung, and my lymph system. So that's basically, they just said, we'll do what we can. And I said, I'm not doing anything. I know what cancer treatment is like. I've had a fabulous life. I'm not doing anything. And my one daughter said, well, that sounds like you're just being stubborn. And my little brother said, well, you have to try something. So I did. And so I did 3 cycles of chemo. And in January, things looked better. It's too much to get rid of all of it, but things looked better. So I went ahead and scheduled a bunch of clinics because I was like, well, I'm just going to be able to do this. That will be no problem. And the chemo is really the hardest part of cancer. It's not the cancer. So I scheduled some clinics. Then in April, when the scans came back, it was the opposite. Everything had grown, and you just never know what the day is going to bring. Literally, you can be like, oh, I feel pretty good today. And by the end of the day, you're like, oh, I feel terrible today. So traveling, especially long distances, became a little hard. So I had to send a couple people to some clinics. But I have a clinic scheduled in July, a 2-day clinic, and I'm looking forward to it. And that's part of it is, last fall, people thought, why don't you quit your job at Progressive Dairy as an editor? And I thought, oh no, I've got to get up every day and sit at my computer and do what I need to do. But that does get a little hard. The deadline thing was the hardest thing because I don't know what the day's going to bring, and it's a deadline for a magazine. So they have been so wonderful and worked with me on what I could and couldn't do. But, why I have kept doing it is because it gives you something to do. It occupies your mind. It keeps you going. And I have this little herd of 6 head out here and a pony. And last fall, my daughter was like, you're going to sell these, you're going to give these to these people, the pony can go here. And I was like, oh, no, they're not. So every day I have to go out and feed and have to go out and, I'm washing and brushing and all that. So something happens every day in my barn outside. So I think it's important to do. So I scheduled the show clinics and I said, I'm going to make it. And a couple of them have been last minute. I'm just not going to make it, so I'm sending this person. Someone I'm super confident can do it for me. And people have been very understanding in things, but you have to have something to do and to keep going. And that applies not only to being sick, but we sold our cows today. So now what are we going to do tomorrow? Well, we're going to figure out something new. And that is even how the show clinic piece came about. Is I've been showing cattle for people for a long, long time. I've been in the industry and in the business, and I'm kind of getting towards the end of that. And so what can I do? Well, I can take what I know and pass it on to the next generation through these show clinics. And that's how it started. I was like, I want to remain in the business and relevant, so how about doing show clinics? So people get discouraged, and social media is a big piece of where we see this discouragement all the time. And I'm like, well, just turn. Just stop for a minute and see where you're at and turn and go in a different direction. And that having a new project to do and something to do every day will get you through whatever you need it to get you through.
And so as you share that, this is what you've been living through sickness and in health for how many years now, is just looking at where are those projects and where are those opportunities to be able to continue to take what you've learned all these years and to continue to give back. And Katie, I think that's one of the things that I admire about you most, is that you just haven't stopped giving back. And you touched on this a little bit, but I guess for us to be frank, is like that last cancer scan you had, like it was different. There's a different outlook than in the past. And has that changed anything for you with how you look at the time and how you want to use it while you're still here with us?
Well, definitely. So when I went to UW-Madison, I said, I'd really like to know the prognosis. And he said, I'm the average. And I'd have to say I've been above average with my cancer so far. But he said, the average person, you have about 7 to 12 months. And I said, okay. And I literally walked out of the hospital and I thought to myself, once again, I'm so lucky. So now I know what my future is. What do I want to do with it? And my mom always said, no matter what happens to you, it all turns out well. And I even feel a little bit like that. First of all, as I've talked about the million little things I've done in my career and in my dairy life, I've had a great life. And the second part is, okay, so now what do I want to do? So I called my 2 daughters who have little children, and I said, let's go to Disney World and the ocean for just a few days. Really, Kelly's daughters are way too little to go to Disney World, but we did it. And we had a great time. And I'm doing a clinic here or there because I love to do it. And people keep saying, what are you doing those for? Because they are hard for me from a lot of different perspectives. But I'm like, but that's what I love to do. We, perhaps crazy, last week bought the little girls a brown Swiss calf. So we have some little shows here in New York we're going to take them to. And so little tiny pieces. I have this great place in New York. People are more than welcome to come visit. But the porch needed painting. So I painted my porch and filled it with comfy chairs. And I'm living on my front porch this summer. So little things like that, visiting friends. I've made a point to visit old friends and new friends and done things. So I've had some disappointments. I've always, for 20 plus years, have helped at National Hosting Convention with Dairy Jeopardy and Dairy Bowl. And it just got to the point where I was like, I can't travel and be as good as I can be there. So I better not try to do that for the kids' sake, for the Holstein Foundation, who puts those contests on, for their sake. And that was disappointing and hard to do, so we bought the calf during the National Hosting Convention. So yeah, it's a totally different perspective, and I also hope that the conversations around it are still, we have a mutual friend who said, "Can't believe how you're standing here telling me this." And I said, A, had a great life, done whatever I wanted to do, and B, now I know the future, and so as long as I can, I'm going to keep doing what I've always loved to do, and that's be part of the dairy industry, showing cattle, working with youth, as long as I can do it. So
when you had that moment a few months back when the news you got was the news that could have, what some people would have really, really had a hard time seeing past, you were able in that moment to quickly switch into, I'm grateful for knowing, and I'm going to do the best that I can, and I'm going to do everything I can in the time that I have. And for that, it's that in and of itself is so admirable, Katie. But the other piece I want to draw out of that too is you just said, you know what your future is. And that reminds me of when you and I had chatted on the phone not too long ago. And when you talk about, when you said, you know what the future is, like your vision of the future is not just the time that you're still here on earth with us, but it's this beautiful confidence that you had shared with me in that phone call about after that too.
Well, in addition to being part of the dairy industry, I've worked in, at one point I was working in 4-H part-time and child ministry part-time. And after a year or two of that, I said, I need to pick one of these. And I actually went into ministry work. And so child, youth, and family ministry. And as an employee of the church, you teach what the church teaches, the sacraments, the Bible, those kinds of things. But to me, the most important thing to teach youth, especially, and work with families is just having faith that there's something, well, I call it grace. Grace is here with us in every moment. And it can be as simple as a healthy calf was born today, and the mother is going to go into her lactation seamlessly. Those are the kinds of things where the faith and the dairy business come together, in my opinion. But little things too, like the people we meet, the people I've met along the way, is something bigger than us. It just is. And so that piece of my faith has been very, very important. And it's faith in God or just a being or whatever it is. I had a conversation many years ago with a friend, and her grandmother had died. And I remember sitting on the step, and she said, I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't believe that she had gone somewhere else. And I feel so bad for people who don't have that faith. She said that to me. And that's part of it too, is I'm at peace with what happens next. I feel a little bad for my family and the people I'm leaving here, but I know that they've also have a faith that what's happened here has been these wonderful moments of grace all along the way that will sustain them. And oftentimes on social media, when someone says this person died or that person died, I'll send a little note about I hope you just have these wonderful memories and it creates a smile for you, because that's my faith gift to them but remember the good stuff as you go along, because that will bring that smile. So I just think that there's those moments of grace, and there's so many tiny victories in that grace that keep you going no matter what you face. And when you have that faith, it helps you through whatever it is that you need to get through.
Would you say that's what's helped you all these years?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Because of my work in the church, I've met some people. There was a time where I visited people as they were dying, which is, again, a huge moment of it's a wonderful moment if you're a person of faith. And so that again kind of contributes to this. I'm like, well, I say I know my future. I'm not totally sure of my future, but I'm also prepared for it because of this experience I've had. The other part of all of that is I've started a very new, it became approved in February, an immunotherapy drug, and that it won't cure the cancer, but it is working. So as I've said, I have 7 to 12 months. Maybe not, because of this immunotherapy. And how does that happen? It literally was approved in February. So if this was a year ago, I wouldn't be having the immunotherapy. So how did that happen? Well, you can say it's medicine, but how did the medicine get there? Well, someone gave someone the knowledge, and I'll just go with God. God gave somebody the insight to do that. So.
And Katie, you're just sharing your faith is so powerful and encouraging and incredible. And again, what really rises to the surface in that is just the way that you've carried an optimism and a confidence and a trust in the bigger picture. But that's the same way that you've lived your life, and the same way that you've carried that through to these youth activities that we've talked about too. Is just that faith and optimism and seeing the good that's possible and focusing on that. And I'm sure there's times when it's been hard and challenging to do that. And I cannot imagine the immense lessons that you picked up along the way from the dairy youth experiences, your own experiences, just battling something that at times has been outside of your control. And so as you really pull all those pieces of your story together, Katie, I've asked you to come up with a few pieces of wisdom to share with the rest of us. And this is like open mic, take it wherever you want. But Katie, what's the best guidance that you can leave for the rest of us here?
The first one is, especially if you're in the dairy industry, talking specifically to the dairy industry, let yourself evolve in the industry and let yourself try new things, and don't be afraid to do that. It's been more than once that someone has asked me to do something and I thought, I can't do that. And I thought about it. I was like, well, I might as well try it and see what happens. Many years ago, a friend of mine who works kind of in counseling and things, she said, if you don't love what you're doing, don't do it. And a lot of people will stay in a job because it's comfortable and their retirement is building and all these kinds of things are happening. But are they happy? Would they get to be my age and at this point in my life and be able to say, oh, I'm good with whatever happens? Or would they say, oh, I worked my whole life and now I'm retiring and now I'm not going to get to do anything? So be brave and let yourself evolve and take a chance. And there's so many opportunities to do it in the dairy industry. I've called some young people who are 20 years old and said, I need you to go to Georgia and do a clinic. And they've said, what? And I said, here's the outline, go do it. And they've done it. Or I've said to kids, you've got to get on a plane and get to this place so that you can be a fitter for this group. Well, I can't do that. I was like, yes, you can. Get on the plane and go do it. So you've got to figure out how to evolve. And I've talked about it a couple times here, but when you sell your cows, or you have to sell your cows, that is huge, because any dairy, your cows are your life. Being a dairy farmer is not a job, it's our life. And suddenly they're gone. So figure out what do you know? What have you learned from that? And how can you evolve and change and be super brave and go do it? So that would be one piece of things. I I talked to my daughter this morning and I said, do you think I should bring this up? And I'm going to. Especially in the show business, but I've had conversations with young women who work as nutritionists and for bull studs and veterinarians, and I want women in the dairy industry to continue to say, we are leaders, we know what we're doing, we can fit cattle, we can show cattle, we can feed your cattle, we can take care of your cattle from a veterinary perspective, whatever it is. I think women are afraid to speak up. I do a lot of judging of shows, and I've been on the Wholesale Association judging list since it started, and they just have started to put women on the list to judge national shows, and I'm like, we are just as qualified as men to do this. And I just hope that women continue to speak up and be leaders, especially in the dairy industry, because we're not going away. We're not going away. And if you, for example, when I go to a show clinic, there's the ratio of women to men or young ladies to young men is twice as many. So you're going to have to listen to us at some point, guys. Sorry. And we've come a long way, a long, long way. I mean, my mom always tells about she wanted to show a calf in 4-H, and they said, oh, no, you can't show a calf. And even from my perspective, I remember when I first started working as a fitter, and people would say, well, you just feed and water, what we tell you. And I was like, oh, no, I can clip cattle. And so we've come a long way, but we need to continue. And really, the third thing I want to say, and this is as far as my cancer is concerned. When I first found out I had cancer, I had to drive many miles just to get a scan. And in 2015, 7 years ago, when I got my chemo, I got really sick. I literally did not eat for a month. I did not eat one single thing for a month, because if I ate, I got sick. Now, just the short time later, when I go to get my chemo, first they gave me 6 drugs to not get sick, and I have not gotten sick once. And I tell that story because when you have an opportunity to do a walk or a run or a bike ride or donate to those cancer research things, do your research first and make sure the money stays with that research, but do it, because that's where the research happens. For example, at UW-Madison, they have the Badger Challenge every year. They raise lots and lots of money, and that money stays right there in Madison for research in Madison. But when the research in Madison happens and it's good, it goes everywhere. So it helps everyone. So, I do this Badger Challenge year after year, and I say, no, really, don't give me money for this or that. Give money to this research. And all the money they raise, because of sponsorship, goes to research in Madison. But as I said, in February, if I was sick in 2023, I would not be going in a positive direction right now, but because of research, I am. And in the same way, if you know a politician, talk to them about what is happening with cancer research, what is happening even with assistance for people with cancer. I'm so fortunate that I have absolutely fabulous health insurance and those kinds of things, but there's people who don't, and there's ridiculous rules about even getting a disability payment if you have to quit your job. And trust me, if you have stage 4 cancer, you have to quit your job because you don't know what the day is going to be. And those things and cancer is going to affect everyone by 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees of separation. So the more you help and support research and people who can make laws to help with research and all those kinds of things, the better it is for everyone. But we have a big outreach and a big audience here, and support the research because it helps in the long run.
And Katie, to your point, how many of us aren't touched in a very personal way by someone we love, someone close to us, or perhaps it's even ourselves? And so thank you for just sharing that point. And also, the experience that you've had of what research has done for you through immunotherapy. And like you said earlier, it may not be the cure. It's not going to cure what you have, but it can help you to enjoy the time that you have in a better way and hopefully extend that as it's able to. But to tie it back in with the other pieces of wisdom that you shared, it's a summary, Katie, of how I see that you've lived your life. And that is being bold and being courageous and taking chances and speaking up and believing in yourself and what you see in order to do that. But also in such a way, Katie, that you haven't done this for your own benefit. When you've been bold and you've spoken up and you've found that courage, it was either something that benefited someone else at a point in time, or it was something that has paved a way and paved a path for other people, in particular women, as you mentioned too, to be able to have the confidence of what's been done before them and the people that have paved a way. You are one of those people. And so what you shared as your wisdom is, it's not just words that have come out of your mouth, Katie, but I just really see it as you living that example. And I thank you personally for that. I thank you for the way that you've done this for the Holstein Association, the way that you've done this for so many youth that have gone on to do things far beyond lead a show calf around a ring, but have taken the skill set, taken the knowledge, taken the confidence that they gained from those experiences. And just so very grateful, Katie, for what you've shared with us today, this journey of your dairy story, of what cancer has been for you along the way, and of how you've really never let it stop you from doing what you love. And even in this time point that you're at right now, you're still doing these show clinics. And I will say this, so you touched on National Holstein Convention. You still, morning of Dairy Quiz Bowl, I'm there with my team and I'm getting the text from you. That's that little extra push of encouragement. And that is such a gift that you have given back. And I just want you to know how much so many of us have appreciated that and benefited from it, because you've always been brave enough and bold enough and courageous enough to say what you believe needs to be said for the greater good of others. And so as we kind of wrap up our time together, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
The last thing is, and it's pretty simple, and I actually never thought of it like this before, and when youth are going in to do an interview for a Distinguished Junior Member Achievement Award or something, I say, now you're going to have a question about who your mentor is, and it can't be your mom and dad. Of course they're your mentor. Pick someone else. And so you and I had talked a little bit about doing this podcast and legacy, and a friend of ours, Michelle Payne, just put, who I just admire so much, she put a post on social media a few weeks ago and said, your legacy is the people you've touched along the way.
Going back to that word legacy, how do you hope people remember you?
Well, I think one thing is that you've talked about a couple times here is being bold, and I'm sure there are times when I spoke up and there will be some people who remember me and say, she never stopped pushing, she never stopped talking. And that's okay with me, because I think it has brought about some good things. And the other thing is, I want the success I've had with my show clinics and with teaching showmanship and with all the youth programs to multiply and to go on. And so that as the showmanship at World Dairy Expo that I was the longtime superintendent of, I hope that continues to grow and evolve and have new parts to it. I hope that kids continue to wear their white shirts in showmanship and follow the guidelines that have been set up. And not only that, but just, I don't want to say Millwheel Show Clinics was mine, and so it goes with me, but I want people who have been part of that to go ahead and carry it on for me and expand it and give as much as they can back to the youth who are part of the dairy industry and the youth who have the potential to be part of the dairy industry. Because I can talk about a lot of my experiences in life, but as I said before, being part of this industry is not our job, it is our life, and it's who we are. And so hopefully through the work I've done, that continues to grow.
And Katie, it will. It most certainly will, because of the way that you have led with such passion and such diligence, and we'll use that word boldness again, because you've always been able to look at something and see what's possible, even when others can't, and how to put the pieces together to have an even greater and more powerful impact. And again, that boldness to speak up about it, because you could see what was possible and you just weren't going to stop and let it be subpar. And that's led to some incredible movements from your passion. But going back to what you shared with legacy, it's the impact on the people. And there will be many, Katie, that will think of you as they're showing themselves, watching their kids show, or just taking that little lesson that they learned from you along the way, whether it was at a clinic, in the show ring, just watching you. Even my own daughter that you picked out and said, I want you to be a part of this showmanship project. Those are the things that leave a legacy and leave an impact. And I hope you know that you've already fulfilled that. And it will keep going for many, many, many years to come. And Katie, I'm so grateful for the time that you took, and that this was something that was important enough and fun enough for you to be a yes for, because you didn't have to be a yes for it. You're choosing your yeses. And just so grateful that you were a yes for this.
Well, Peggy, thanks so much for asking me to do it. It has been fun talking with you this morning, as it always is, chatting with you. And I wasn't sure how much I was going to say and share as I went along, but I think that it was important for people to hear where I'm at and how I'm going to go forward. And hopefully it inspires people to find some positives just in their day.
You just heard from Katie Coyne here on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast today, and I challenge you to do two things after listening to this episode. And number one is think about that person. Think about the person that was a Katie in your life. Think about that person that offered you encouragement and sent those little nudges your way. And not because they had to, but because they simply believed in you and believed it was the right thing to do. Think about that person and send them this podcast and just let them know. Thank you. Thanks for being the Katie in your life. And the second challenge I have for you after listening to this episode is to think about who you can be a Katie to. Who are those young people in the dairy industry that you cross paths with? Maybe you're a coach for youth judging or quiz bowl. Maybe you are someone that works on a dairy or goes out to dairies and sees those young people that are around you every day. And when you see them, you see something in them. And when you see that in them, tell them. That is my challenge to you as well, is to be that person that offers those words of encouragement. And sometimes it's just the one simple conversation that will send someone on the path that will take them into a career in the dairy industry for the rest of their lives. And if there's one more thing I hope you take away from this conversation with Katie, it's to just keep living. Even when you know that life may not be as long as you might think it is, don't stop living it. Keep doing the things that set your heart on fire. Keep following your passions. Keep getting out there with an attitude of service, and keep your faith. I'm Peggy Coffeen, and thanks for joining me on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. I would love to hear what you thought about this episode. I would love to know how it hit your heart today. So hit me up with a DM through Instagram or Facebook, or shoot me an email to peggy@upleveldairy.com. And if you aren't getting our emails in your inbox every time a new episode drops, make sure you subscribe to Uplevel Dairy at upleveldairy.com.